Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we are talking to Tovah Klein. She is the director of the Barnard College Center for Toddler Development and a psychology professor at Barnard College at Columbia University. In Tovah's role as a researcher and professor, and in direct care with parents and children for over 30 years, she's helped to define what every child needs to thrive, regardless of their life situations. Tovah is the author of How Toddlers Thrive, and her latest best-selling book is Raising Resilience: How to Help Our Children Thrive in Times of Uncertainty, in which Tovah offers a strategic approach to help kids become resilient now and into the future. Welcome, Tovah.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So let's start with a book starts, which is you were working on research about parents helping families navigate uncertainty, and then the perfect storm occurred. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So this really comes out of two areas of my work. I work both with families on a day-to-day basis on just everyday challenges of being a mom, being a dad, having children. And I also have a line of clinical work around trauma and some studies around trauma, particularly in younger children. So let's say children under 8. And these might be individual, like, escaping a flood or a fire in your home, but also large scale, like children who were direct witness to 9/11. I was in Japan after their big tsunami, working with preschools and children. And so one day I realized, what I'm doing all the time? I'm helping parents face uncertainty, whether it's my child's teacher's out today or I've just had to flee because of some climate disaster. We face uncertainty all the time. And so in 2016, I started to put together a proposal, like I really should write a book on what uncertainty does to us and then how we help our children and buffer them from the stressors of it. And I put it aside, even though I'd written the proposal, and then the pandemic came. And I remember thinking in those early weeks of the shutdown, one, like, what am I going to do to help families and children? And equally, well, I was going to write this book on uncertainty, and this seems really uncertain.
I remember it well. All that
Right?
doom scrolling.
Yeah. So I thought, well, I guess it's time now to write this book on uncertainty. And that's where this really comes out of, this idea that we're always facing uncertainty that we know, little, medium, or big. And children will always have things happen in their life that they're unsure of, that are adversities. And how do we prepare them and build this relationship with them so that whatever life gives them, which is unpredictable, they can face it and handle it knowing they're not alone.
Now, we like to start often on the podcast by sort of defining the issue. And I wonder about this idea of facing uncertainty. Is there a spectrum where, like, some uncertainty really doesn't matter and then raising children in a war zone is the other? And, like, is there a line where it starts to matter on that spectrum? Or is it just we all face this to varying degrees?
Yeah, I think it's a little of each. We all face this to varying degrees. And what we face every day, most of us and most people listening, is some uncertainty. And then in life, you may end up with much, much bigger uncertainty. We don't want to. I mean, nobody wants another 9/11. Nobody wants to face war firsthand or war at all. But what we can do is use our every single day uncertainties, like there was a change in the schedule for a young child, or your high schooler gets to school and finds out that what's on the exam that they had prepared for is not what they thought. Like, these are everyday uncertainties. My friend won't play. I'm ghosted by another one. And it's in those uncertainties that we're helping build our relationship with our children, because uncertainty, small or big, rattles us. As humans, we do best when we know what's going on. There's certainty. I discuss it in my book. It's called homeostasis, right? It's a biological state of, like, I call it, all is good.
Yes.
Good. So what happens when you get pushed out of it? We call it stress. And so it's dealing with these everyday small stressors that sometimes are bigger, that is helping prepare a child to face the world. And we don't know what they're going to face, but I don't want parents to be worrying so much about it. I want them to know we can actually build this relationship that is their buffer and becomes their bedrock over time, even
So
as they move out in the world.
let's talk about resilience and how you define it too, because I tend to think of resilience as the booby prize for hard knocks, right? You get back up and at least you have resilience.
Yeah.
But you connect resilience to uncertainty, which is a little bit different. So how do you define resilience?
Yeah, so I've spent really my life working with parents and children and helping, you could think about fortify them because humans have more resilience than we think. And often people think of it, as you were saying, Amy, as this one time thing, like something bad happened, you got through it, as if that's magic, which it's not. It's a long process. And then you're okay, or you're better, or you understand it. But in fact, that's when we see it. But resilience is being built every single day. So it's really much more of a dynamic between the parent and child that then is going to reside in the child is an ability to handle life. So when I think of resilience, what I think of is the ability to adjust, to adapt, and to be flexible. That's kind of what if you think about our brains, I always say this is about the brain and the heart and the soul of the child. But it's in our brain that we feel stress, that we manage stress. And what adversity does is it pushes for, are you able to do this, handle this big thing? And then you can come out stronger, but you can't come out stronger if you don't have a base and if you are completely on your own. Children aren't on their own. They're with a parent who's helping them build this ability to adjust, to adapt, to face the disappointments, to be upset. All of those emotion pieces are what goes into helping people be resilient when the bad thing comes. And we do just what you're saying is we see resilience. We say, oh, that's resilience. And it doesn't mean going from terrible to good in a moment. We talk about bouncing back. I use that term too, but it's not an instant. It's a process.
I think there's a flip side of the spectrum I was talking about how much, stress is on the flip side. The audience knows I have sometimes cast a bit of a gimlet eye on the concept of grit and resilience, which I think was kind of very in vogue a couple of years ago, that many children are very damaged by trauma.
Yeah.
That sometimes it feels like, are we having a conversation about trauma that almost glamorizes trauma as like, oh, well, our kids are so soft that they need more trauma. But many people I know personally have really been very damaged by trauma. And that where are we on that spectrum in that conversation, if that question makes sense to you?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I'm going to take it in two pieces.
Great.
One is that when my editors said, we want you to reframe your book a bit, same content, we want it to be all about resilience. And I was like, oh, that is a buzzword. I won't even touch that.
Right.
I'm not a buzzword person. I'm like at heart, a serious, researcher, academic, and applied clinician, so to speak. And they were like, but everything you talk about and write about, I said, oh, it's about raising a decent human being. That's how I see my work, this book, How Toddlers Thrive, like my first one. How do you raise a decent human being? And that's at the heart of this book. And they said, yeah, but it's all about resilience. So I had to really think it through and say, they're right. Because part of being a decent human is kindness and compassion for others and being confident that I can handle myself and that I'm not alone. Like that's what we want for our children, right? The sort of the me pieces and the caring about other pieces. So when I reframed this and I really thought about, okay, what does it mean to raise a decent human being? It really is about helping them handle the tough things in life because everyone knows how to be happy.
Right.
I say this to parents all the time when I work one-on-one with parents. I'm like, they know how to be happy. That's not why you're here.
Right.
Our job as parents is to help our children through the hard emotions, the hard times, and let them know they're not on their own for it. So yes, every adult has their past to contend with. And we have wounds. We hopefully have glories that we bring with us. Love is a base somewhere, even if it wasn't a parent, maybe it was a grandparent or a teacher. But people come to being a parent with wounds and harms that we have to become aware of. And that's a big part of my book, is what I call the you factor.
Right.
And in fact, in an interview just yesterday, somebody said, this book is really about us, not children. I said,
We
well,
say it all the time on the podcast. We're like, we got bad news for you.
Yeah.
This is about your behavior. There's no magic box that your kid is going to find in the woods full of self-esteem. This is about turning the mirror on yourself.
Exactly. It's funny. I say the same thing. I'm like, I got bad news for you. It's exactly the same.
It is hard.
And in fact, it's the good news because we can work on ourselves. And what we have to do is look into ourselves and shed the shame, which we all bring with us. I think particularly women, but men do too. And we have to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Being a parent makes you very vulnerable. Oh, whoa. Why am I upset about that? Why do I care if she does this thing or he says this thing? And so when you ask about trauma, that's another term that just gets thrown about, as you know. It's just like everything's traumatic. And I have to say, when I was training in clinical psychology at Duke in the 1990s, I'm not even sure we used the word trauma so much, but I was working with adults who had abuse in their childhood that they were carrying forward. I was working with young children who had been sexually abused and identified. And what I was really interested in, I continue to be, is what happens to the child, what becomes part of them, and how do they carry it through? And then importantly, what's the role of adults, hopefully in protecting them from harm, but being there when there is harm and helping them heal from that and move forward. And adults need the same thing. But we have to remember that stress is not trauma. And that's an important distinction, right? That even very stressful things are not necessarily what we call traumatic. And then the other complication here is that what's traumatic for one person is not necessarily, it might be hurtful, but may not have the same negative impact on another. And so it really is somewhat of an individualized approach to what is this relationship and what's getting in the way of that parent seeing the child for who they are. And that's really the key here.
We're talking to Tovah Klein. Her new book is Raising Resilience, and we'll be right back. So, Tova, you explain that parents, we can start this work with our kids and should start this work with our kids before the tsunami comes. This is something we're doing on an ongoing basis, and that we should be what you call anchors and containers for our kids in order to help them develop resilience. So walk us through what those two things mean.
Yeah. So this is really important, and it's what parents are already doing every day. This is not like add something to your marketplace. This is what you're doing, but it's unpacking it.
Okay.
One is being an anchor for a child, which means you're their security. You're their secure base. You're the one who's saying to them in some way, you're okay, I'm here for you. Or that was a really rough spot we just went through. I still love you, even though we can't go outside before bedtime. So the anchor is this stability in this sense of I'm here for you unconditionally, which can be hard at times for any of us. But that's the anchoring. And children need that. We think of it with young children. We tend to forget children need this through their whole lives. And teens, when they're pushing us away, still need us to say, I'm here for you and you're going to be okay.
We're testing it. We're parents of teens.
Oh,
we're very much nodding.
They're tugging on that rope to make sure it's still there.
They're tugging, right? Yeah. They're pushing you away, and they want to know that you're not going to actually go away. And then the container sits right alongside this. You can think of that wobbly boat. There's the anchor keeping it steady. The container is literally, if you think about, there's the child or teen and the parent. It's the space between the two of you that says, I can handle your emotions. I can hear your emotions. I don't have to like them, but I'm going to accept them, and I'm going to accept you, and I'm going to help you learn to handle those emotions and have them and not be judged for them. And so it's literally a containing space, because when children are all out upset, teenagers are screaming the most vile things that you never imagine would come out of your child's mouth. They actually need to know that they're safe, and there's someone who's going to either put up a limit or say, I get it, how upset you are. You can't throw things, but is there as that container. And that's a real safety feature. Children, again,
We
need this through their life.
My mother, who was a therapist, and we talk about this all the time, would call those boundary seeking behaviors.
Yes.
And I think of that so often now with teenagers, like, oh, they're looking for containment. And I
Yeah.
think that it's very tempting when our kids push against us to kind of let the walls down and say, okay, you're grown now, you do what you want, or the conflict seems to be being the container, but they're actually looking for those walls, which is I think it's hard for us to understand. Some things about parenting, I'm like, oh, I kind of get it. It comes naturally to me. But I find those boundary seeking behaviors, even from younger kids, can be very challenging to feel like, oh, they're looking for a wall. They're not looking for a door.
Yeah, the safety is in the guardrails. You know, I have this example in my book from a woman who became a friend of mine. But when I first met her, she was talking about how she had grown up in one of the Eastern Bloc countries under, a communist government. And she said, when I was growing up, I thought that the way you teach, we learned that the way you were taught something was, you gave a child like a tricycle, you showed them, here's how you pedal, here's how you steer, you gave them point A, point B, and you said, go in a straight line. And she said, but what I realized being here, she's an educator, is that you set up, basically some guardrails. You give them the tricycle, you maybe help them get on, and then they can zigzag, they can go back, forward, on, off, and eventually they figure it out. It's those guardrails that says, you're not going to ride your bike in the street at this age. You're not going to fall off a cliff. I'm here to set those boundaries. We call them boundaries, right? For a reason. And they're safe. And children feel better and teens feel better. This is, I think, confusing when they know that actually the parent is in charge, not harsh, not rigid, not mean, but says, yeah, you want to do it? It's not happening.
The other hard part about this, though, Tova, is those guardrails. We're in charge of setting them. And sometimes we set them too tight out of a desire to protect them from something bad happening, or as you say in the book, because this triggers something in us. If I almost got hit by a car while I was riding a tricycle, maybe I don't let my 7-year-old ride his bike in our driveway where she's pretty safe, right? That you start to, the guardrails can get put in the wrong places sometimes. So how do you walk parents through setting guardrails that will give their kids the appropriate amount of resilience training?
Yeah, I think of that as, really as knowing thyself. I say it and they're like, literally, here's a tip for parents, know thyself, which at times can be hard to do. But one is to be forgiving. We all, set up these rigid rules at some point based on something in us or in the context of our lives, maybe a lot of stress or tension at home or something, is to give yourself grace because you can back up. Right? So parents are always saying to me, oh, but I already set this limit and now I'm realizing it's wrong, but I don't want to give up authority. As if saying to a child, I rethought this and actually it's fine for you to do that. Which actually says to your child, my parent is human. I am too. I mean, we're their role models. And so backing up is not giving up something or showing a child, oh, we're wimps. It says we're human and we're in a dialogue on this. We might not be in a dialogue on something else, like running into the street when you're 5 years old, but we are in dialogue over this. And so I think we have to give ourselves grace as parents. People are so hard on themselves, right? And I've over the years worked with many parents who, as I'm getting to know them, I'll sort of say, like, what happened? Tell me something about your childhood, because I'm feeling something. And it's often that there was tragedy. And it could be that a sibling died. This is a common one, I find. And the child felt some responsibility, even if they had nothing to do with it. It could have been cancer. It could have. And so that's kind of haunting everything they're doing. Even though they're successful in life and they've got a big career and you name it, they're living in terror of losing their child, but they're not aware of it. Once you become aware of it and you say, oh, like you said, oh, it's that time that I almost got hit by a car. I need to really come to grips with this, or I'll never let my child on a bicycle. And they want to be on a bicycle.
Right.
And so it's that self-reflection, which I don't want to say it's easy because it's not, but it's important. And awareness is always the first step.
I have a question about anchoring in terms of like when, the rubber hits the road and bad things happen. We had a situation in our town and our family where children at my children's school were killed, and it was extremely tragic and awful. And I was so shaken by it myself that I felt like, how can I guide anybody through this? I am so out of answers for myself about how something like this could happen. And so what do we do when we're being looked to as the anchor and we feel like, whoa, I am super adrift and I've got nothing. Like, please don't pull on me because I'm drowning.
Yeah. Such a poignant question and unfortunately very applicable to many people today and tomorrow. And which is, how do you both take care of yourself and be there for your child? So one is, I mean, we know this, but I feel like I need to say it, is nobody can be a parent alone. And if you're a single parent, then you have to ask, who else is in my community? And even if you're a coupled parent, you have a partner, you still need to say, who else is in my community? Can somebody bring dinner over tonight so I can get a hold of myself? I think we're not always good about asking for help.
Right.
We're often better about giving others help. That's almost an easy one for some people, myself included. Like, here, I'll take a meal over. I'll take your child for the afternoon, right? But we have to ask for help for ourselves as well. Give me an hour or whatever it is. But the other piece is this shift, because often in the moment, you don't have that luxury.
Right.
And it really does have to be a shift of saying, I've got to get a grip. Right. And I'm not a grit person, just like you brought up earlier. But there are times that as parents, we have to say, I've got to get a hold of myself. That might mean taking a break. That might mean saying to your children, depending on their ages, I'm upset too. And I'm going to take a few minutes. I'm going to be okay. What children need to know is we're going to be okay.
Right.
It's very scary to them when we're upset, when we're sick, even if it's, the flu, and we're not going to succumb to it. But being their anchor means they turn to us for steadiness all the time. And sometimes our partners do too, by the way. They're like, you can't be down, but we do have a right to be down and to respect ourselves that way. But I think in the face of our children, we have to say, so how do I get a grip in this moment? And I can give you like some great examples. 9/11, in the interviews we did, parents of very young children who were fleeing from ground zero, right? The buildings were falling in front of them. They've got to get out of their apartment or pick their children up at daycare and school. And as soon as they get to what they consider safety, maybe it was just 10 blocks away, somebody says, we've got to get lunch for the children. Or is there an outdoor place that they can play safely right now? And the switch comes for most people very quickly. And for the people it doesn't, because people had fled, they sort of met up with other people or got to a relative's apartment or something. Somebody took over. And we heard that over and over. And I heard that in the tsunami in Japan, which, people were devastated. Lots of people died. But there was this coming together at the schools saying, we'll take the children. So I think it's intuitive in some ways for us to say, oh my gosh, I've got to get a hold of myself. But we also have to say, maybe after you get the children in bed or where they need to be, then we really turn to ourselves and shed the tears and shake and do all those other things, maybe connect to a friend or a partner, because children need us too. And we're not alone anymore. It's not just about us like it was one day in the past.
Right. And it's not necessarily, as I think my parents' generation would have been more oriented to, pretend everything's
If it's
fine. Like
fine.
never acknowledge that you have human
Yeah.
emotions and, be this kind of brave face
Right.
as the number one priority.
Yeah. And showing children real emotion is also important. We don't have to overwhelm them with it,
Mm,
but saying to them after something horrific happens in your community, something really unfortunate, or a death in your own family, I am upset or I am sad, whatever the feelings are, I'm going to still take care of you.
right.
Mm.
That hits. That
Yeah,
really
yeah,
hits.
Yeah. We're going to
yeah.
still get dinner tonight. I'm going to still say goodnight to you when you go to sleep. And
Mm,
then sometimes we have to force ourselves to do it. It may
right.
not feel natural at the time. And then you get this break once everybody's in bed or once, you're in a safe place after that community fire or whatever it is. And children learn from us. Oh,
Mm,
they're human too. They get
mm.
upset.
So, Tova, in this book, you have 5 pillars of resilience that the kids need to learn. Skills a child, a person needs to learn in order to have resilience. And then, secondary to that, what we can do as parents to help support that skill. So, can you walk us through the skills and how we can support them?
Yeah. So I think of these as, this is a relationship between a parent and a child of whatever age. And in that relationship, this is what we're doing. And so it's not like a stage wise or anything like that, but it's how do you love your child? How do you attune to them, figure out what they need? And the first is we talked about with the anchoring and containing helps a child learn to trust. What they trust is that you're their safety net.
Mm,
You're the person who's going to be there for them even when times are really bad. And then that becomes a trust in themselves. I'm going to be okay, which eventually becomes a trust in others. Like, I want to be with other people. And then going along with that is what we're doing every single day as a parent is helping children learn to handle their emotions. I call it the balance principle. So that's, depending on the age of the child, helping them identify emotions. You might say to your child, you're so mad right now. I get it. Do you want to stomp your feet? And then you take that over time. As children get older, you handle that differently, but we still are helping teenagers, young adults handle those emotions.
And can you
And
talk a little bit about the term co-regulation that you
mhm.
use in the book? Because I think that's very helpful.
Yeah. So co-regulation is actually a psychology term. And again, I'm always a little apprehensive when psychology terms get into the, sort of the broader, and yet it's a good thing as well. So co-regulation is actually a process by which a parent or caregiver, so the adult, is helping the child regulate or handle their emotions. When children are very young, it's easiest to think of our infants. They're in our arms, we're rocking them or patting them. We are literally the ones handling their emotions. Toddlers move out in the world. We're still doing it. I always say to parents, I put my arms out wide and I'm like, you are basically their brain
Mm,
once they've lost it. They're screaming, they can't handle those emotions. And the more we do that for them, and literally there's studies of the brain of the parent and child brain getting in sync eventually. It takes a little while. You're helping them by identifying emotions. That's part of co-regulation when we label them or name them. um, but also giving them, as they get older, ways to handle them and modeling that as well, right? When we come home and we're frustrated over something, hopefully we don't walk in and kick everything over, but say something like, this was so maddening what happened today at work. Or when I tried to return this item at the store. Like, we're modeling that and we're helping children get that. That's literally co regulating. We're
mm,
helping their brain go up and then come back down, go
mm.
up and come back down. That's not something children can do on their own. They really rely on us. And then we start to step back more and more in time as children get better at it. But you got to wait because they're going to come running right back to you at some point.
Still
Uh,
late teenagers in my
Still late
experience.
teenagers. I would say when my young adult children check in on something, it makes me so happy. First of all, I want
Oh,
everyone to know, like, my goal of this book is like we all want our children to want to come home,
Yes.
even when they're out in the world and they don't have to come home. But it's usually something they're either confused about or mildly upset about, and they just want to check in. That that's part of the co-regulation, right? Of
mm,
I'm going to be here for you. And that then becomes what I call the freedom trail. So developing agency, I want to be out in the world. 2-year-olds want to be there. 12-year-olds want to be there. 20-year-olds, right? They're moving out in the world. And that's where we start to really put up guardrails.
Mm.
Like, yes, it's okay to jump outside, but we're actually not jumping from the counter in the kitchen.
Mm.
It's your first guardrail, so some limits, but children feel such a sense of empowerment when they have the ability to make some decisions, the ability to decide for themselves in small ways that get bigger over time. That's agency,
Yeah,
or
and
what we call independence.
we talk a lot about that has to start at a very young age, right? Like, and look for the opportunities, maybe at the town pool, they can go buy their own snacks. You're right there in case they get the wrong change, or they, in my case, buy popsicles for their 9 friends or whatever. But looking for all of those opportunities
Yeah.
for freedom and independence
Yeah.
from a young age.
Yeah, from a very young age, and choosing their own clothes, not because you've given them 15 choices, but because you've put 2 outfits out, or you've said,
Mm.
oh, pick the blue shirt or the red shirt, right? There's a real strength in saying, I've decided. And my parent respects my ideas
Mm.
as well. And then obviously over time, they can have more independence. They, depending on where you live, can go to the corner store. As their next step, they can ride their bikes in the neighborhood. So that's getting more and more out in the world, and that feels very good. And then related to all of that is connecting to others, right? So the power of our connection to our children is that they literally take that to heart. And I mean that they, like, the term we use is internalization in psychology. They internalize this connection is a good thing, and I want this with others.
Mm.
So they learn to
Oh.
trust and be connected to other adults. That could be teachers, relatives, neighbors, but importantly also to children, peers. And that's a kind of wild world, You have to learn to navigate the peer world. So they take the sort of the model of their relationship with us into relating to new people, and with an excitement. And those skills are really key. And if you have a child with challenges because they're neurodiverse or they were delayed in some way, then you give them more support in learning to connect to others, because what we want is genuine and authentic relationships. And sometimes children need support in getting there.
I was going to ask about that because as a parent of a neurodiverse child, sometimes these checklists, I'm like, we're missing like 3 of those. Like, regulation is harder, connection
Mhm.
is harder. And I think, is that it's all the same with more scaffolding? Is that sometimes I hear these lists and I'm like, oh, we can't do
Yeah.
those things. Maybe this isn't for us. But is it just that you need more scaffolding to get there?
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. So, in writing this book and in all the work I do, I don't see anything that I do like as a checklist. It really is much
Mm.
more about, what are we getting from this relation? What are our children getting from their relationship with us that becomes part of them, that moves them out in the world, or helps them
Mm.
move out in the world, come back to us, move out in the world more? It's what we're doing all the time. And yes, within any of these, some children are going to need more support at some time
Right.
than maybe they needed it another time. Some children are going to need more support throughout their lives, right? So, absolutely, some children need more help handling their emotions, from a little more help to a lot more help, to I need specialists to come in and really help me figure out how to do that. But it's still the same process.
Right. And the fundamental of connection can even be stronger sometimes with a
Abs-
child who has different kind of needs. And so it feels like the fundamentals of what you're talking about still, those I can see very clearly.
yeah, these are human fundamentals. Like, if you
Right.
think of how do we build a human who could be good in the world for themselves and for others, this is what I see as the core principles. And if you look at the science, the developmental science or the neuroscience, this is where sort of the pieces that they're saying, yeah, this is the core.
Mm.
And when we don't have these pieces in place for a child, then we have to think about, okay, how do we course correct? or what kind of interventions are needed. It's never hopeless,
The
right? I mean, you can go through horrific things in life and still, as an adult, find the support, hopefully, or the community, and then the course corrections to come up with a narrative for yourself of, yes, this happened to me, or yes, this was part of my very challenging development because of who I am. And that makes me who I am today. And that's not just Pollyanna-ish, that's real. That can be real.
we haven't really talked about the fifth pillar, which is, I think it's the whole Megillah,
Yeah.
that that
The
kids have to
whole
love
Megillah.
themselves, right? You have to love yourself,
Yeah.
and in order for kids to love themselves, we have to love them unconditionally, even
Yeah.
though they're not that good at this piece or that piece of it yet, that we love them as they really
Yeah.
are.
It's really seeing children for who they are. And if you have more than one child, you know this. They come into the world, first of all, so different. They just enter the world. I was like, that
Right.
was to me an amazing thing about each of my births. I hear this from parents also who adopt children. They're like, when we first got her, it was so different than when we got our sister. Like, babies are who they are. They enter the world, they enter our lives. And then it's our job to keep stepping back and trying to get, our glasses or our eyesight as clear as we can from all our stuff so we can say, who is this child in front of me? And sometimes that's easier to do than others. And when it's challenging for us, that's when we're really pushed to say, who am I? What am I bringing to this? Because the way to help a child accept themselves and get on a path to being whoever they're going to be, which is not always up to us. A lot of it we can nurture, but a lot of it they bring, is to say, I want to love you for who you are, and I'm going to try as hard as I can to understand what you're asking, what you're telling, what you're showing. We get that by listening and looking. I think we don't listen enough as parents. As a society, probably we don't listen to children as much as we need to. But if we can really listen to them and keep saying, okay, I'm going to try to understand you. And we're going to apologize when we don't, because we're going to all make mistakes. You go back and apologize. They, in time, come to feel, oh, my mommy, my daddy gets me. I'm okay. And it's that core of I'm okay that allows them to love themselves and accept themselves and all their challenges.
And I think also your idea of that can be reset as well. Like I've definitely gotten into corners with my kids where I feel like we are not liking each other right now. Like this person is driving me crazy and I am not parenting them well. But I like the idea that there's a path back to these
There's always
pillars
yeah.
that you can get into really bad spots with kids who this is another thing I did not expect about parenting. I was very much like, I can't wait to get this lump of clay to mold the way I want it. And then I actually got human beings who were
Yeah.
quite annoying and difficult in their own ways. And I think sometimes it can feel like we've lost the script, the two of us. We are
Mm-hmm.
just on our own islands and we don't understand how to get back to
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. I call it the dance,
Hmm.
because who leads the dance? I mean, yes, in many ways the parent has to lead it, but often the child's going to lead it. And then sometimes there's going to be no synchrony in that dance. And that's what you're talking about, right? And children are very forgiving if there's love as a base and if there's some trust, even if the trust has been broken at the moment. If the core in that anchoring that we talked about earlier is there, then you can reconnect. Children are forgiving.
What I
And
love
It's a
about it,
relationship.
I love about all of this, like the good news and the bad news are the same news. You have to look at yourself first, but then we also learn resilience. I'm listening to all
Yeah.
this, like, right, if I do all this work, then I get to be a happier person and like
Yeah.
myself more. So at least there's something in it for us, which is a happier us.
Absolutely. I think children can make us into such better people if we're willing to let that happen and cringe when we realize, oh, this is about me. I mean, sometimes it's embarrassing to ourselves. And you say, okay, I need to shed this shame and blaming myself and being hard on myself and laugh, have some humor about it. Like, wow, I really did mess that one up with my kid. um, I've heard one of my children say, in his teen and now as a young adult, like over and I'm saying something, yeah, my mom and I, we get into it, like we battle, but you know what? Then we make up and all is good again because we're so
Mm,
similar, the two of
mm.
us. And I had to learn over the years to really go back and say, I'm sorry. I should not have blown up like that and not blame him because I have to own my own behavior. And when we do that as adults, it says to children, it's far from perfect. You're far from perfect, and the world is far from perfect, but I'm going to help you do really well in it because I'm going to help you course correct. I'm going to be the one to apologize. That's the hard thing for us as parents often. We have to be the ones to go back and say, I messed up.
We've been talking to Tovah Klein. Her new book is Raising Resilience: How to Help Our Children Thrive in Times of Uncertainty. It was an instant bestseller. I think it's pretty clear why. We're going to put the link
Yes.
in the show notes so everybody can get this book for themselves. Tova, tell our listeners where else they can find you and your work.
Yeah, so I have a website, tovahklein.com, and I'm on Instagram at Tovah Klein. I have a Facebook page, How Toddlers Thrive, that has more than just toddlers on it, but I've kept the name as well, and I'm on LinkedIn.
We will link to all of those places so you can find all of Tova's work, and her book is on sale wherever you find books. And Tova, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
I agree. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Tova.